They said British hard power was a museum piece. They said the era of big deck carriers and nuclear submarines had sailed off with the last Cold War. Then a carrier strike group could awake across two oceans. New submarines rolled from their sheds like silent cathedrals of steel, and a refreshed nuclear posture snapped into focus. The message is simple. The UK doesn't need to be the biggest to be the sharpest. Look at the map. Arctic ice, the GIUK gap, the Baltic, the Red Sea, the Western Pacific. Each bears a Union Jack, not as a boast, as a breadcrumb trail of commitments. In a world where sea lanes are contested and satellites flicker under pressure, London has decided that presence matters again. For 3 decades, Britain swung between ambition and austerity. Carriers retired, then carriers returned. The army fought in hot deserts, then contracted. The Navy kept the lights on at sea, with fewer hulls and more miles. The RAF flew missions with a shrinking fleet, but growing precision. The wake-up call wasn't one headline, it was many. Crimea, grey zone harassment at sea, missiles falling on cities, drones swarming air bases, energy insecurity, supply chains that snapped when stressed. The lesson hit home. Deterrence can't be a memory, it has to be a muscle. Let's take a step back and look at the big picture. Meeting the NATO floor was yesterday's story. The new focus is depth and readiness. Real money for real kit. Production lines that run hot. Ammunition stocks that don't dry up after a long weekend. Spares in warehouses. Housing that keeps families in the force. Training days that build habits, not just headlines. Capability without readiness is theatre. Readiness without depth is a sprint you can't finish. Britain is pushing to have all three at once. Now, the foundation. Britain's continuous at-sea deterrent is the quiet promise behind every public statement. It's the calm voice that says, don't miscalculate. New ballistic missile submarines are in build, engineered for a long, silent life below the chop. Next to them, nuclear attack boats carry the blade. They scout, they track, they strike. They do the patient work the world never sees. Britain's traditional advantage, knowing where enemy submarines are, and making sure they never know where we are. It's the kind of quiet that keeps adversaries awake at night. Meanwhile, the AUKUS partnership binds the UK to a wider arc of undersea power. Shared designs, shared training, shared logistics. It isn't about waving flags. It's about welding an alliance under the waterline. When you standardize the difficult things, reactors, combat systems, maintenance, your boats get safer, smarter, and more available, and your adversaries get nervous. Shift to the surface. Type 45 destroyers are the tall shields that guard the fleet. They're being upgraded for crowded skies and complex missile threats. Better sensors, smarter software, denser magazines. The goal is simple. Make incoming salvos a problem for the attacker, not for the deck crew. Behind them come the frigates. 2 paths, 1 purpose. The Type 26 is a high-end submarine hunter with a quiet hull and ears like a cathedral. The Type 31 is a versatile workhorse designed to bulk out numbers and show up fast. Different tools, same mission. Control water, protect trade, back up allies, and give the carriers room to breathe. And the carriers? They're mobile airfields with coalition DNA. British crews trap and launch alongside Allied jets. Escorts swap in and out with partner navies. Replenishment ships refuel the group at sea, so the wings keep flying. This isn't about vanity, it's about reach. A ship you can't ignore is a message you can't miss. Presence with purpose. A moving piece of national strategy. Now, shifting gears to air power. Today's F-35B brings stealth, electronic warfare, and fused data. It can scout, it can strike, it can manage a fight like a quarterback calling audibles in the pocket. It talks seamlessly with ships, with P-8 patrol aircraft, with satellites overhead, and with ground units over the horizon. Tomorrow's mix stretches the playbook. Longer range weapons, loyal wingmen concepts, and faster software drops that add capability in months, not years. The perfect airplane doesn't exist. The perfect ecosystem does. Zoom out to the wider RAF. Typhoon is getting an electronically scanned radar that doesn't just look, it thinks. Scan, jam, and strike can happen at once, a force multiplier in one nose cone. Protector drones add long endurance eyes and precision strike with the paperwork to fly safely in UK airspace. P-8 Poseidon watches the GCAP and the Norwegian Sea, knitting together the undersea picture with ships and submarines. Airborne early warning returns as a modern brain in the sky, because seeing first often means finishing first. Tankers keep the force topped up, heavy lift moves people and kit across continents. Air power is tempo, and tempo wins fights the enemy hasn't planned for. Air defense from the ground matters again. Drones, cruise missiles, and the occasional ballistic threat don't care how glamorous your fighter is. Britain's ground-based systems now cover key sites, bases, and deployed forces with modern missiles, 3D radars, and command systems that join the dots fast. The next step adds lasers for the cheap shots and missiles for the hard kills. That mix changes the arithmetic. When your interceptor costs less than the threat, you can stay in the fight longer. Back on land, the British Army is leaner than in living memory, but it's growing fangs. Challenger 3 brings a new gun, better optics, and modern protection. Ajax finally steps into the role it was meant to play, finding, fixing, and feeding a fire hose of data to the rest of the force. Boxer wheels troops under armor across long distances and rough roads. The star of the show is Fires, longer-range rockets, standoff missiles, precision that reaches far beyond the forward edge. Drones and counter-drones become daily tools, not exotic gadgets. Electronic warfare maps the spectrum and blinds the enemy at the worst possible time. The first 72 hours of a modern war are a duel between artillery, sensors, and deception. The army is rewriting its playbook for that world. At the tip, the Ranger Regiment does the slow, patient work of partnership and pressure. They train allies, they gather human texture, they help friendly units stand on their own feet, and when needed, they move from the shadows with speed. The Royal Marines have reinvented themselves as the future commando force. Small teams, fast boats, loitering munitions, sensors that draw a coastline without being seen. Think raids, denial, and sabotage in the cracks of the littoral. Less D-Day, more Ghost in the reeds. Importantly, the High North is no longer a side project. Britain now treats Arctic warfare as a core habit. Camp hubs in Norway, cold weather kit that works when batteries don't. Skis, snowmobiles, and helicopters that play nice with glaciers and low light. If you can shoot, move, and communicate at -30, you can do it anywhere. Also, yes, the tea is very hot. That's not just morale, that's logistics in a mug. Now, the new high ground. Space isn't just weather photos and pretty auroras. It's secure comms, navigation, missile warning, and on-orbit maneuver. Britain is modernizing SATCOM, flying new payloads, and practicing live operations with allies. In cyber, offensive and defensive teams sit under the same roof. That matters. Threats move at machine speed. Walls alone don't work. You need hunters as well as guards. On a map, these look like pins. In reality, they're synapses, connections that let the whole force think, adapt, and hit harder. Let's talk about everything that hums, buzzes, and whispers. Radios, radars, links, jammers, data links. Britain is rebuilding the craft of electromagnetic warfare. That means sensors that spot the faintest emissions. That means jammers that bend a battle picture just enough for a wing to slip through. That means decoys that make enemies waste shots on ghosts. Own the spectrum and you tilt the table. Deterrence is a factory story as much as a fleet story. Britain is scaling artillery shell output. It's restarting complex missile lines with trusted partners. It's building new frigates and support ships in yards that are hiring apprentices as fast as they can teach them. The jet program with Italy and Japan is a bet on a family of systems rather than a single diva aircraft. Interoperable, upgradable, actually buildable. If the Defence Industrial Base were a Premier League team, the transfer window looks excellent. Big signings, smart loans, and a deep bench. Here's a piece people skip: logistics, fuel bladders, replenishment ships, roll-on, roll-off ferries, pre-positioned stocks that don't live only in PowerPoint. The UK is rehearsing the unglamorous parts: container handling, convoy protection, ammo distribution, repairs in the field. Air bridges connect home bases to frontline strips. Tankers spool up at a day's notice. Engineers build, mend, and move the bits that make steel and silicon feel like a team. Winning the opening weekend is nice. Winning the second week decides wars. A modern force needs resilience in depth, hardened shelters, dispersed operating locations, backup power if the grid flickers, cyber hygiene for every supplier, housing that doesn't drive families away, pay and retention that make engineers and pilots choose another tour. The best kit in the world can't do much if the people who use it are exhausted, and the place they live makes life harder than it has to be. Meanwhile, alliances multiply everything. NATO on the northern flank, combined patrols in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, Indo-Pacific exercises where distance stops being an excuse. The Joint Expeditionary Force ties Northern Europe together for rapid responses close to home. Five Eyes intelligence amplifies what each member sees alone. Under AUKUS, undersea talent is shared. Under GCAP, air-powered design is shared. The carriers knit navies together. The RAF swaps data like a shared nervous system. The Army trains partners who go on to fight better. It's coalition warfare by design, not improvisation.
Exercises aren't parades. They're rehearsals for a bad day. At sea, crews practice damage control until muscle memory replaces panic. On land, artillery units burn through drills, then restack, then do it again. In the air, pilots fly red versus blue problems where losing is allowed and learning is mandatory. Joint exercises add the friction of accents, time zones, and different playbooks. That's good. The fog of war lifts fastest for teams that have already wrestled with each other's quirks. Let's stress test the system. Picture a crisis in the high north, a shadow on sonar, a contested shipping lane, a satellite that starts acting strangely. Britain surges a frigate with a towed array to the GIUK gap. A P-8 paints the water with sonobuoys while a destroyer sits to windward, radars humming. A submarine slips into the deep, slow and patient. An RAF tanker stretches patrol times. A small commando team forward deploys to a Nordic port, checking the keys, mapping the drones, and walking the tide tables. None of this makes headlines. It makes options, and options deter. Now, a different ocean. A missile attack on shipping. Drones crowd the sky. A British destroyer unpacks its air defense playbook. Long-range intercepts first, close-in layers ready, a laser warming on the rail for the cheap targets. A frigate peels off to escort a convoy through the choke point. The carrier group stays outside the danger ring, but inside striking distance. Intelligence teams fuse 100 feeds into one picture. A quiet phone call aligns allied rules of engagement. The message lands. Trade keeps moving. One more scenario. An exercise that starts tense and stays tense in the Indo-Pacific. The carrier group joins partners. F-35s push a long-range mission with allied tankers. A British submarine plays a game of underwater chess with a rival boat and wins by not being seen. On the surface, a frigate practices anti-submarine screen tactics while the destroyer tests new software against a simulated swarm. The lesson is boring and vital. Complexity favors the team that has rehearsed complexity. Modern conflict isn't just hulls and missiles, it's meaning. It's the story told to populations and partners. Secure comms and strong encryption are part of it. So is a transparent approach to truth. When your photos are honest and your after-action reports arrive fast, lies have less room to grow. The UK has learned this the hard way and the smart way. The goal is simple. Own your narrative. Challenge the falsehoods. Don't feed the trolls. Win the argument by doing the thing and showing the thing. Quick palate cleanser. British sailors will tell you the North Atlantic has a personal grudge. Meteorology remains undefeated. Somewhere in procurement, a spreadsheet still lurks in the bushes, waiting to leap out and terrify a minister. Yes, the new laser is impressive. No, it won't toast your crumpet. Please don't point it at breakfast. Let's be honest about the risks. Headcount is tight. Recruiting and retention are a marathon. Some programs took the scenic route to the finish line. Availability on key ships has had off days, ammunition depth is better but still competing with global demand. And every new capability needs new people and new training hours. The fix is dull and necessary. Steady funding, ruthless prioritization, honest schedules, and relentless testing. Plus homes, schools, and support that make service life sustainable for families. So why say the UK's military is on another level? Because it's building layered deterrence you can actually see. And some you can't. Submarines you won't find. Carriers that sail far and often. Destroyers that turn complex skies into solvable math. Frigates that hear what others miss. Jets that sense, share, and strike. Satellites that whisper across oceans. Cyber teams that guard and hunt. All stitched into alliances that arrive with their own strengths. Not the biggest, the most integrated. Not the loudest, the most credible. Every exercise is a rehearsal. Every deployment is a message. The carriers practice long-range strike. The destroyers practice layered defense. The frigates practice the patient hunt. Tank crews grind through gunnery until accuracy becomes instinct. Pilots cycle tactics against opposing teams that refuse to play nice. Sailors fight make-believe fires, so they'll beat real ones. Tempo matters. Repetition matters. Confidence under pressure matters. This is how you shorten the timeline from surprise to response. Another key shift is nuclear credibility. The sea-based deterrent remains the backbone, but the UK has chosen to add complementary layers with allies, tightening the weave of NATO's nuclear umbrella. The logic is redundancy and clarity. You don't shout, you make sure your message can't be missed, even on a bad day, even if one piece of the system has a problem. That's what layered deterrence looks like in practice. Deterrence begins in classrooms and labs. Apprenticeships in welding, machining, and avionics feed the yards and airfields. Universities seed the code that flies tomorrow's jets and guards tomorrow's networks. Test ranges host drones, sensors, and lasers that were lecture slides last year. Britain's edge comes from people who can build, fix, and think under pressure. Hardware is strategy you can touch. Education is strategy you can scale. Hard power needs hard rules. Clear legal frameworks keep operations clean, even when the fight gets dirty. Targeteers live by them. Cyber teams abide by them. Special operators carry them in their heads like a checklist. That isn't weakness, it's strength. It keeps coalitions together and keeps public trust intact. In a long contest, legitimacy is a weapon too. Britain is a maritime nation. Trade rides on hulls. Energy moves in ships. Insurance rates and shipping timetables respond to security like a weather vane responds to wind. A balanced fleet is an economic plan in disguise. That's why carriers matter. That's why frigates matter. That's why unfussy logistics ships and humble harbour tugs matter more than they'll ever know. Peer over the horizon. Autonomy at sea, in the air, and on land. Swarming drones that scout and strike. Underwater vehicles that map cables, pipelines, and seabeds. Hypersonic threats that stretch defenders and force smarter queuing. Quantum navigation to shrug off jamming. AI co-pilots that sift the ocean of data and hand humans the decisions that count. Britain doesn't have to invent everything. It does need to integrate quickly and buy smart. The winner of the next war isn't the country with the flashiest PowerPoint. It's the one that feels good enough tech, in enough numbers, soon enough. Hardware needs a culture that moves. Honest debriefs, clear command intent. Delegation that lets junior leaders solve problems without waiting for a signature. The British military's best habit is humble professionalism. The second best is humour under stress. Both are force multipliers you can't buy. They have to be taught, practiced, and protected. Take another step back. Credibility beats bluster. The UK is rebuilding muscle memory for sustained operations. Refuel at sea, rearm under pressure, share data across services and borders without a committee meeting. The result isn't a headline. It's a force that shows up ready on short notice, far from home, with friends. That's the level that matters. What could knock this off course? Complacency. Budgets that rise on paper but stall in warehouses. Shiny kit without spare parts. Training cut to make room for ceremony. Recruiting that can't fill high-skill roles. The antidote is simple, not easy. Keep investing, keep testing, keep failing fast in exercises so you don't fail for real. Keep telling the truth about what works and what doesn't. Keep the people who make all of this possible. In Europe, Britain is the agile heavyweight, nuclear-armed, carrier-capable, with an undersea game that shapes the Atlantic fight. In the Indo-Pacific, it's the reliable +1 that brings real ships and real jets, not just speeches. In cyber and space, it's a coalition amplifier. In industry, it's a builder, not just a buyer.
That mix deters miscalculation and steadies allies who've decided the free sea is still worth the cost. Is the UK's military might on another level? If the measure is tank totals or headcount, no. If the measure is integrated, coalition-ready power that can deter tonight and fight tomorrow, yes. That's the point of an island nation with global interests. Don't try to be the biggest. Be the most ready, the most connected, the most credible. So here's the question for all of us. Will Britain keep the accelerator down, funding the magazines, finishing the upgrades, training in the cold and the dark? Or will just enough sneak back onto the menu? Deterrence is a story you tell every day. Right now, the UK is telling it with ships, jets, satellites, and people. The next chapter depends on keeping that story loud, clear, and true. And if you listen closely, beyond the wind and the spray, you can hear the soundtrack of a military climbing to that next level. The quiet hum of a reactor, the snap of a catapult, the calm checklists of crews who know that when the call comes, they'll be ready.